Hello. So in this video, we're going to talk about Christine Evans's play Trojan Barbie. So this is another one that I have read several times and I absolutely love. I've published an essay on this one. Trojan Barbie is a very loose adaptation of Euripides' The Trojan Women. But Evans does some super cool things with it. In particular, one of the big things that she does is she breaks down temporal boundaries. So the play, in terms of the setting, the time is listed as the past folded uneasily into the present. And then in the author's note here, Evans tells us about both the space and the time of this play, and they're very important in terms of understanding what she's doing conceptually. So she tells us the Trojan women's camp is a barren space that suggests both ancient and modern war zones. The sparse presence of elements such as cyclone wire, plastic sheeting, or rusted corrugated iron sheets evokes contemporary refugee camps. There are other spaces. A space of the gods where Polyax and Cassandra at times appear, Lada's doll hospital in England, and the tourist cafe she visits in contemporary Troy. There's a sense of an archaeological dig, as if time were stacked vertically in layers of ruin, with modernity at the top layer on the surface. Since layers of time collapse into one another in this play, it is best served by a flexible and evocative design, where discrete spaces can form and bleed into one another rather than being realistically rendered. So that gives you a sense of the temporal play, this postmodern approach to time that Evans is using in this play. Because we have, on the one hand, the Trojan women in the camp, and this is the camp of Euripides, after the Greeks destroy Troy, while they are deciding what to do with the female survivors of Troy. So we've got that space, but it's also a modern refugee camp from a contemporary war. I mean, we get reference, Hecuba makes reference to having friends from Sarajevo, or from Serbia, I think it's Serbia, actually. And so there are these contemporary references to modern war zones that look in some way something like the Trojan War did in mythology. But then you've also got Lada, who's a contemporary English doll repairer. She runs a doll hospital, and she comes to visit Troy on essentially a singles vacation. And she's clearly a modern tourist, but she gets pulled into this camp with the Trojan women. So time bleeds here. Time bleeds between the different temporal zones. And we see this in a couple of different ways. One is that Lot gets pulled back into the space of the Trojan War, because she's sitting in a cafe drinking a lemonade and ouzo, which sounds amazing, by the way. And she's approached by Andromache, who, if you know Euripides' Trojan Women, Andromache is the mother of Astyanax, who is sort of last male child surviving from Troy until the Greeks kill him so that he can't grow up and take revenge for the destruction of the city. Andromache is very understandably distraught by the brutal murder of her child after her husband has been brutally murdered by the Greeks as well. So Lot is sitting in a cafe and she's approached by Andromache, who comes out of Greek mythology. And then the the guard of the camp, Micah, comes and actually detains, not really arrests, but detains both Andromache and Lot and puts them in the camp. And so Lot gets pulled back into this earlier time frame. But then at the end of the play, Hecuba actually comes forward. So at the end of the play, Lot has been rescued by the British, and she's back in her doll hospital. And it says here, the stage directions say, a bag lady enters on a gust of rain and howling wind. It is Hecuba. Lot does not recognize her. Hecuba is wearing contemporary rags and Polyx's beer bottle top necklace. She's soaking wet and looks deranged, as if she had crawled into the 21st century from the bottom of the ocean. That's such an evocative image, I think, as if she had crawled into the 21st century from the bottom of the ocean. But again, that's what we get here, is these sort of blendings of time, and time doesn't work linearly. Time isn't distinctly segmented. It's amorphous. And this idea of sort of amorphous experience being disjointed, being out of time, out of place, is something that the Trojan women talk extensively about in the refugee camp, especially at the beginning of scene 8. Because as in Euripides, the women repeatedly discuss what their fate is going to be. And Clea suggests, I guess we're prostitutes now. Esme says, I doubt it. We won't be getting paid. Clea says, or ghosts in the dead zone at immigration. I heard about this Iranian guy. He'd been living in Charles de Gaulle Airport for 14 years. Got his papers cleared to escape to Paris, but then they wouldn't grant him asylum. So he's allowed to land, see, but not to leave. Can't go forward and he can't go back. Finally topped himself in the men's toilets near the International Food Court at arrivals. Esme says, there's a black hole now where I used to think future. Okay, not such a great future, but something you could stitch together. Out of family, language, shared jokes, even going hungry. But now, it's like someone tore up a map, and that map was my body. Clea says, there's a country without borders, growing like an oil spill. A space where you can't live. Esme says, but you can't, strictly speaking, die. Clea and Esme both say, that's our new home. Charles de Gaulle Airport all over the world. Clea says, we don't belong anywhere. Esme says, not since our city burned. So this is really important, both in that sort of postmodern sense of like playing with temporality, playing with space and time as modes of understanding ourselves. But it's also really important because Evans here is trying to express this experience of contemporary displaced people. Refugees from wars, refugees from natural disasters, economic refugees, people who are uprooted and lose their sense of place and time, which is or can be incredibly disruptive to one's identity. And so Evans is very interested in that in this play. She's also interested in a couple of other things. One is the way that bureaucracy works. And this, in a way, this is the sort of banality of evil, right? From Hannah Arendt, Eichmann in Jerusalem, I think. This idea of like the people who are committing these horrendous crimes against humanity are not necessarily bad or hateful or immoral. They're just caught up in a machine that drives them to do these horrendous things. And we see this in a couple of different ways. The most overt is the character of Micah, who's a sort of speaker on behalf of the Greeks. And he several times addresses the audience directly. So the first time he says friends, allies, townspeople. What is the strategic plan for Troy, you may well ask? To think of Troy as a failed state, mired in civil war and ancient hatreds, is to take an unnecessarily negative view. We must look to the future. We must imagine Troy rebuilding itself over the bones and rubble of the past, pulling itself up by the crutches, by the bootstraps. Any questions? Any English speakers out there today? They tell you you'll see the world. They put you in sealed planes and tell you you're traveling, but somehow you always end up in Troy. So he's got this sort of cynicism about the military and things like this, but he is the official mouthpiece of the Greek occupation. And we get other lengthier speeches from him that I'm not going to deal with, but it's very much this sort of officialese, this official speak in terms of like using stock phrases that governments, military officials, etc. tend to use to obscure the reality of the violence that's going on. We also get this with the British officer who comes to rescue Lot toward the end. Like, she's thrilled to be rescued from this camp where she's been imprisoned. And she's like, oh, thank God, I thought I was going to die here. We have to go right now. The city's in flames and they've doused everything in petrol. And the officer says, not so fast, madam. First, I'd like to see your British passport and some secondary form of identification, preferably with a recent photograph. And I need to get you to sign an indemnity waiver and fill out a few simple forms. And then I should like to ask you a few questions. And that's the end of the scene. So just that idea that, like, you have to fill out forms in triplicate and things like this before you can be rescued from a city that's literally about to burn to the ground is really, really, it's part of the satire of the play. And it's incredibly insightful and funny about the way that not just things like imperialism and military activity work, but the way that humanitarian efforts work as well. The other thing that Evans is really interested in Trojan Barbie is modern art, which of course is somewhat fitting because this is a postmodern play, and the idea of modern or postmodern art really fits in quite well with this. But Polyx is the character most directly associated with this. Polyxena, who is one of Hecuba's daughters, one of Hecuba's two daughters that have survived the war. I think Hecuba in Greek mythology had like 19 kids or something crazy like that. And they pretty much all die by the end either of the Trojan War or of Sophocles' Agamemnon. Yeah. No, Aeschylus's Agamemnon. Sorry. So Polyx is an interesting figure. She's very young in this. She's, I don't know, maybe like early teens, mid-teens, something like that. She gives us this description of experiencing modern art for the first time, and I think it's really important and thematically significant here. It's lengthy, but I'm going to read the whole thing. She says, everything stinks here. I hate it. It stinks because we have to use gas for cleaning, even the hospitals, for cleaning floors, toilets, wounds, everything. You can't get soap anymore. And since the fence, you can't even go out. There's nothing to do. It's foul. This whole country is like a poisoned, stinky gas station just waiting for someone to throw a match. I am so over it. Oh, I want to smell desert rain again. It hasn't rained for 3 years. It's probably because we're cursed. Anyway, before the fence, Mama took me to the museum so we could see our cultural heritage. But it was all looted, except for the contemporary art. So we had to look at that instead. The program said that transcendent ideas of beauty are no longer what art's about. But actually, I just think we couldn't afford it. Like I said, it's hard to get stuff. So most of it was really ugly and all made of broken things, or things that really aren't supposed to be art, like bottles and rags and old shoes and stuff just stuck together. The most disgusting sculpture of all was called Trojan Rat. It had yellow eyes, and it was crouching in a pool of dark stuff that looked like oil or blood or something yucky. And it was hollow. You couldn't see inside it because it was just made out of wire and plastic bags. Inside its belly, it had a little white dining table, all tiny and perfect like real art. There was a family sitting around it, eating dinner, but their house was bleeding and it was inside a rat, which had mean glittery eyes made of those yellow beer bottle tops that the soldiers leave lying around. It made me feel sick, but excited too. I didn't like it, but I did. I didn't, but I did. Mama hated it. She said it was decadent and defeatist. I said, well, Hecuba, we are defeated. She didn't say anything to that. And then I decided, I like modern sculpture. On the way home, I started thinking about things I could make out of my own broken stuff. Mostly what I've got here is these, and she gestures to her Barbie dolls. Most of them are a bit messed up, or they're covered in scribble and stuff, which is okay for modern sculpture. I'm going to get a big piece of pink cardboard. Helen says if you're nice to the soldiers, they'll get you stuff. And then I'm going to get all my dolls and nail them onto it, in the shape of a big heart. So when it's finished, it will be this huge heart made of mashed up dolls. It will be sort of flat, but sort of three-dimensional. It will be very, very scary. I'm going to hang it out in front of the women's tents. And I'm going to call it Trojan Barbie. And when it's done, me and Cassandra will rain down revenge on our enemies. We will smash them like dolls. Death to the invaders. And then she dances. There's a dance scene that the stage directions describe as a Xena, Buffy the Vampire Slayer, Britney Spears fantasy. So this idea of modern art and like making something out of broken things is really, really significant in the play, because the dolls in this play very often are identified with the broken bodies of the Trojans themselves. And that becomes extremely significant in the final moments of this play, where Polly X has largely completed her sculpture. She's presented in sort of high above the stage in front of a heart made of broken dolls. And there's two Trojan soldiers, Max and Jorge, who were supposed to take her to be sacrificed to the spirit of Achilles. And it says in the final set of stage directions, Polly X lifts her arm in defiant salute. Max and Jorge stretch a red ribbon across her neck. This is very stylized and not realistic. Then they pull it tight, sharply. Polly X's head falls to the side, her throat cut. It bleeds. She is dead. The men disappear. White fairy lights, like Helen's garden party dream, or at a tacky Vegas show, light up around the perimeter of the heart. The image of the dead girl, framed by the pink heart, surrounded by broken doll part, glows garishly. While a world away, Lot continues patiently picking up broken doll parts from the floor of her doll hospital. Then the little festive lights go out, one by one. I think it's such a powerful ending. Oh my God. Again, the dolls in this play, both Lot's dolls and Polly X's dolls, all of the dolls that we experience, even Astheniax is a doll in this. Like, Andromache's child is not played by an actual actor, it's a doll that she carries. The dolls are the bodies of the Trojan dead, the bodies of the broken Trojans. And that's super, super powerful, because again, this final image that we get in the last moments is of Polly X, the actor playing this character, becoming one of those broken, dead dolls.